Well, it had to happen, didn't it? Finally, that retro thing has gone on for so long that they've run out of things to hark back to. And so Kawasaki, just to be different, have gone overseas to the wild, wild west, back to a time when the Indians were the only ones giving trouble to the fledgling manufacturers Harley and Davidson. And the result is this, the Kawasaki Drifter. This is the 800, baby brother to the bigger 1500, and it is very much an Indian clone, which makes a novel alternative to the usual Harley clone. And it goes back to a time when bikers were just becoming proper bad boys. So, you better lock up your daughters, as long as they're country and western fans, obviously. Once on board, it's difficult to describe the riding position when you climb on for the first time. Perhaps sitting on a very well-padded toilet whilst playing the piano is the best way. But once underway, it's really very comfortable. There's more than enough torque from the 800 twin, though certainly not on Harley-Davidson scale. Don't expect to be thumping along with the cylinder firing every third cat's eye. Start to encounter anything like a decent incline going uphill in anything over 4th or 5th gear, and you will find power dropping away. So they decided to base it on a 6 or 7 decade old Indian. They may as well have based it on an old mangle for all that's got in common with a modern day bike. But although it looking like something out of an ancient circus, it's not that creaky underneath. For instance, at the back, underneath this enormous fender, made here out of plastic or fiberglass, which I guess is a lot better than old-fashioned metal because it would have made more than your house. There's actually a monoshock. It is sprung, but you would never tell from the outside, which means your mates will think you've got a really tough backside. Working our way along, big V-twin, essential kit. On the other side, a lovely shiny pipe, perhaps a little bit muffled, but you can modify it, I'm told. And even an imitation enormous cover over the air cleaner here. Big engine bars, and at the front, unbelievably modern this, though perhaps not what you'd expect on a sports bike, they are upside-down forks. But not in the way most of us would take upside-down forks to be read. And perhaps the strangest retro touch and the most ultra-retro touch of all that I've ever seen on anything, a solid disc on the front. I haven't seen a solid disc in decades. Don't know why you'd want one. All of which is well and good. It's good to have those retro touches. As somebody's pointed out, it even's got a spoked rear wheel, which you can't possibly see, but at least you know it's there. But once you're on board, you can't see any of that stuff. It's a bike. So what's it like? Well, it depends what you've been riding before. But if you're from a sports bike, it can be a bit of a surprise, because the first thing you'll do is, somebody's had me pegs. It's here. Big old highway boards, and the biggest rear brake I've ever seen. On the other side, we've got a heel and toe gear lever as well, which can take a bit of getting used to. But once you are on board, it actually doesn't feel as big as it looks, maybe because it's narrow and quite low. It feels quite manageable and certainly not too heavy. We've got very basic dashboard on the tank, nothing here that we don't need, nothing as elaborate, for instance, as a rev counter. We've just got a speedometer that goes up to a very optimistic 120, 3 lights, and that's it. Everything else is pretty familiar, nothing out of place. It is basic, very basic, but that's in keeping with the whole feel of this bike. It's not an elaborate Christmas tree. It's just got what you need and nothing else. If this were a homemade custom, it would have had 2 fillers, I'm sure, for the tank, but it's just got one rather ordinary one offset. None of your tart stuff, this. And most importantly of all, of course, some people are impressed by looks, others are going to be impressed by noise. What does it sound like? Well, it's a V-twin, and that's about it. It doesn't... You're not going to frighten the neighbours with it. You're not even going to wake the neighbours with it. That big screen does an excellent job of keeping the wind off and everything nice and free when you're wearing your absolutely necessary open-face helmet. However, it also does a very good job of slowing the bike up. That said, it all feels very stable and actually surprisingly nimble. When the time comes to haul everything to a stop, those brakes do a surprisingly good job, even if it's in a bit of a panic. And even that solid front disc brings everything to a halt nicely, cleanly and safely. Perhaps the most noticeable feature of riding a cruiser like this or any other is not the fact that your feet go first, but the fact that you have to learn to think ahead quite a long way. There's certainly no time for last-minute hard braking and quick turning. So, who's going to want one? A drifter? Good name, that Drifter. It kind of conjures up images of Clint Eastwood in the desert. And maybe that's it. Maybe that's answered the question. That's what it's all about. Image. It's a case of, do you want to look like this or not? Because when a bike gets this specialised, it can mean only one thing. You're going to love it or you're going to hate it. The purists, well, they're probably going to hate it because it's not a real original Harley or an Indian. And let's face it, you're going to look a bit of a wally trying to mix it with the scratches on a Sunday morning. It won't go round corners fast enough. But if this is the kind of bike you want, this is probably the only kind of bike like this on the market. And if you want it, you'll have to pay for it. This is a second-hand 98. It'll cost you about $4,200, for which you do get quite a few extra goodies, like the screen and the crash bars, all original Kawasaki's thrown in that you don't get as standard. If you want to buy new, then you can buy the new 800, which is an injection as opposed to this carb model. That'll cost you about $6,200. And if you want the big brother, well, the big 1500, which is a shaft drive, not a chain like this, that'll cost you a shade over $8,000. Ultimately then, my only worry is going to be, is the best moment for this bike the moment when you take delivery, you ride it home, you stick it on the drive, wait for your neighbours to poke their nose over the fence and go, whoa, what is it? My concern is going to be, have you then peaked? Is that its best ever moment? Are you then going to reach for the garage doors and the keys for your R1? I don't know, maybe I'd have one if it could be one of about 5 bikes.